I was staring at the eviction notice taped to my front door when I realized the HOA had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. My name is Quinton Barrett, and I had lived in the Sycamore Springs community in Scottsdale, Arizona for 3 years without a single problem. I kept my lawn pristine, painted my house the approved shade of beige, and even volunteered for the neighborhood watch. But apparently, none of that mattered to Patricia Hendricks, the HOA president who had it out for me since the day I refused to vote for her proposed assessment increase. The notice claimed I had been officially evicted during an emergency HOA board meeting on March 15th. According to the attached meeting minutes, I had committed multiple violations, including parking a commercial vehicle in my driveway, operating a business from my residence, and creating excessive noise disturbances. The vote was unanimous, 5-0, and I had 10 days to vacate the premises or face legal action. There was just one problem with their carefully typed minutes. Every single allegation was a lie, and I could prove it. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recorder app, scrolling back to March 15th. The recording was 2 hours and 17 minutes long, crystal clear audio from the emergency meeting I had attended in person. I had started recording the moment Patricia called the meeting to order because something about the whole situation felt wrong. My gut instinct had been correct. Let me back up and explain how I ended up in this mess. It started 6 months earlier when Patricia proposed increasing the annual HOA fees from $1,200 to $3,000. She claimed the money would go toward improving community amenities and increasing property values. When I asked for a detailed budget breakdown during the November meeting, she got defensive and accused me of questioning her integrity. I was not trying to be difficult. I worked as a financial analyst for a tech company in Phoenix, and reviewing budgets was literally my job. The numbers she presented did not add up. She claimed the community needed $50,000 for landscaping improvements. But I'd done some research and found that similar projects in neighboring communities cost half that amount. When I pointed this out, other homeowners started asking questions too. The vote failed 7-18. Patricia glared at me from across the room like I had personally insulted her family. From that moment on, I was marked. The harassment started small. I received a violation notice for leaving my trash cans visible from the street, even though it was trash day and everyone had their cans out. Then I got cited for having a weed in my front yard. I went outside with the HOA inspector, a nervous guy named Martin who clearly did not want to be there, and we searched for 15 minutes before finding a single dandelion growing between the sidewalk cracks. The fine was $50. I paid it without complaint because I knew Patricia was trying to bait me into an argument. I documented everything with photos and timestamps, keeping a detailed file on my computer. My wife Sarah thought I was being paranoid, but she also knew Patricia's reputation. Before we moved in, our realtor had warned us that the HOA president was intense about rules and regulations. Sarah and I had been married for 5 years, and she worked as a pediatric nurse at Phoenix Children's Hospital. She pulled long shifts and did not have the energy to deal with HOA drama when she got home. I tried to shield her from most of it, but the situation kept escalating. In January, I received a notice claiming my house color was not in compliance with HOA standards. I had not painted anything. I pulled out the original approval documents from when we bought the house and confirmed that my beige exterior was the exact shade listed in the HOA guidelines. I submitted a formal response with the documentation, and the violation was quietly dropped. February brought a new accusation about my landscaping. Patricia claimed my shrubs extended 6 inches over the property line into the common area. I hired a surveyor to come out and measure everything. Cost me $400, but the survey proved my landscaping was completely within my property boundaries. I sent the official survey results to the HOA board, and again, the violation disappeared without acknowledgement. That was when I realized Patricia was building a paper trail against me. Each violation notice, even the ones that were dismissed, went into my HOA file. She was constructing a narrative that I was a problem homeowner who repeatedly violated community rules. On March 10th, I received an email from Patricia stating that an emergency board meeting had been scheduled for March 15th at 7 in the evening. The email was vague, mentioning only that several urgent matters required board attention. All homeowners were welcome to attend, but the meeting would proceed with or without community participation. I showed up at 6:45, walking into the community clubhouse with my phone in my pocket. The recording app was already running. I had a feeling this meeting was going to be important. The board consisted of 5 members. Patricia was the president, a woman in her late 40s with short blonde hair and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. The vice president was Gregory Morrison, a retired accountant who usually went along with whatever Patricia wanted. The secretary was Linda Chen, a quiet woman who took notes and rarely spoke. The treasurer was Robert Wallace, who seemed perpetually confused about his role. And finally, there was Amanda Foster, the newest board member who had just been elected in January. I took a seat in the back row. There were maybe a dozen other homeowners scattered throughout the room, most of them looking annoyed about having to attend an evening meeting. Sarah was working a night shift, so I was alone. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7. She went through the standard opening procedures, having Linda read the minutes from the last meeting and asking for a treasurer's report. Robert fumbled through some papers and mentioned that the HOA had $43,000 in reserves. Everything seemed routine. Then Patricia's expression changed. She leaned forward, clasping her hands on the table, and said there was a serious matter the board needed to address. She did not say my name at first, just started talking about how certain homeowners had been flagrantly disregarding community rules and creating an environment of chaos and disorder. I felt my phone warm in my pocket, the recording app silently capturing every word. Patricia finally said my name, claiming that I had been the subject of numerous violation notices over the past 6 months. She pulled out a thick folder and started reading from it, listing every citation I had received. She did not mention that most of them had been dismissed or proven false. She made it sound like I was a serial rule breaker who refused to comply with reasonable HOA standards. Then she dropped the bombshell. She claimed that I was parking a commercial vehicle in my driveway, operating a business from my home, and hosting large gatherings that created noise disturbances lasting past midnight. She said the board had received complaints from multiple neighbors and that my behavior was negatively impacting property values for the entire community. I stood up immediately. Several heads turned to look at me. I asked what commercial vehicle she was referring to. I drove a Honda Accord. Sarah drove a Toyota Camry. We did not own any commercial vehicles. Patricia did not miss a beat. She said witnesses had reported seeing a large white van with company logos parked in my driveway on multiple occasions during business hours. I explained that I worked from home 2 days a week, which was completely within HOA rules, and that I had never owned or parked a commercial vehicle on my property. I asked her to provide the names of these witnesses and the dates when this supposedly occurred. She refused, claiming the HOA had a policy of protecting the anonymity of community members who filed complaints. That was not actually a policy, but she said it with such confidence that some of the other homeowners nodded along. I then addressed the claim about operating a business from my home. I was a financial analyst employed by a technology company. I worked remotely part-time, sitting at my desk analyzing spreadsheets. There were no clients visiting my home, no inventory stored in my garage, no signs or advertisements. I asked her to clarify what business she believed I was operating. Patricia said she had evidence that I was running an unlicensed consulting firm and meeting with clients in my home office. She claimed neighbors had seen multiple cars parked at my house during the day and heard business discussions through the windows. This was absurd. I had family and friends visit occasionally, like every other human being on the planet. And even if someone had overheard me on a work conference call, that did not constitute operating a business from my residence. I was about to respond when Gregory jumped in, saying the board had a responsibility to investigate credible complaints and that my defensive attitude was concerning. He suggested that I was not taking community standards seriously. Amanda, the new board member, raised her hand hesitantly. She asked if there was any actual documentation of these violations beyond anonymous complaints. She pointed out that the HOA had specific procedures for investigating and substantiating violation claims before taking disciplinary action. Patricia shot her a look that could freeze water. She said the board had been more than patient with me, that I had a documented history of violations, and that the anonymous complaints were credible. because they came from multiple sources over an extended period. I asked to see this documentation. I wanted names, dates, and specific evidence. I knew my rights as a homeowner, and the HOA could not just make vague accusations without proof. That was when Patricia made her move. She said that given the severity and frequency of my violations, combined with my hostile attitude toward the board, she was recommending immediate eviction proceedings. She said the HOA governing documents gave the board authority to remove homeowners who posed a threat to community standards and property values. The room went silent. Several homeowners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Eviction was an extreme measure, rarely used and typically reserved for homeowners who had abandoned their properties or stopped paying fees altogether. Linda, the secretary, looked up from her notes with surprise. She asked if eviction was really necessary, suggesting that perhaps a formal warning or a fine might be more appropriate. Patricia ignored her and asked for a motion. Gregory immediately motioned to approve eviction proceedings against me. Robert, looking confused as always, seconded the motion without asking any questions. I stood up again, my voice louder this time. I said they could not evict me based on unsubstantiated anonymous complaints. I had done nothing wrong, and I had evidence to disprove every single allegation. Patricia said the board had the authority to make decisions in the best interest of the community, and that I needed to respect the democratic process. She called for a vote. Amanda spoke up, saying she wanted more information before voting on something as serious as eviction. She asked for a 2-week postponement so the board could gather documentation and give me a chance to formally respond to the allegations. Patricia's face flushed red. She said there had been enough delays and investigations and that the board needed to take decisive action. She called for the vote again. This was where things got interesting, and why I was so glad I had my phone recording in my pocket. Gregory voted yes to eviction. Robert voted yes. Linda hesitated, then voted no, saying she agreed with Amanda that more investigation was needed. Amanda voted no. Patricia, as president, cast the final vote. Yes. The motion passed 3-2. Patricia announced that I would receive formal eviction paperwork within 48 hours and would have 30 days to vacate the property. I was furious, but tried to keep my composure. I stated for the record that this was a kangaroo court, that the allegations against me were false, and that I would be seeking legal counsel. I told them they had not heard the last of this. Patricia smiled that cold smile and said the meeting was adjourned. I walked out of that clubhouse shaking with anger. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, replaying the recording to make sure it had captured everything. The audio was perfect. Every word, every vote, every exchange was documented. When I got home, I told Sarah what had happened. She was appalled. She suggested we contact a lawyer immediately, but I wanted to wait and see what the formal eviction notice said. Maybe cooler heads would prevail once Patricia calmed down. I was wrong. 2 days later, the eviction notice appeared on my door. But when I read through the attached meeting minutes, my blood ran cold. The minutes claimed the vote had been unanimous, 5-0. According to the document Linda had prepared and submitted, all board members had voted in favor of my eviction. There was no mention of Amanda asking for more time to investigate. There was no record of Linda expressing concerns. The minutes made it sound like the entire board had been in complete agreement that I needed to be removed from the community. But that was not all. The allegations had been expanded and embellished. The minutes claimed I had been parking a commercial plumbing van in my driveway for the past 8 months. They stated I was operating an unlicensed financial consulting business with clients visiting at all hours. They even added a new claim that I had been hosting parties with music loud enough to be heard 3 blocks away, with complaints documented on at least 6 separate occasions. None of this had been discussed at the actual meeting. These were fabrications, lies added after the fact to make their case stronger. I immediately called Amanda Foster. I found her number in the community directory and explained what I had discovered. She was shocked. She told me she had received a copy of the minutes and had been meaning to call me because something seemed off. She clearly remembered voting no and expressing concerns, but the official record made it look like she had enthusiastically supported my eviction. Amanda said she was going to confront Patricia about the discrepancy. I told her to be careful, that Patricia was clearly willing to manipulate records to get what she wanted. I also told her I had recorded the entire meeting and had proof that the minutes had been falsified. Amanda went quiet for a moment. Then she said that if the minutes had truly been forged, this was not just an HOA dispute anymore. This was fraud, and possibly criminal depending on how the situation played out. She told me to make backup copies of the recording and not to tell anyone else about it yet. She wanted to approach Patricia first and give her a chance to correct the record before things escalated. I appreciated Amanda's diplomatic approach, but I was not feeling particularly charitable toward Patricia at this point. Still, I agreed to hold off on taking action for a few days, while Amanda tried to resolve things internally. That weekend, Amanda requested an emergency board meeting to discuss concerns about the March 15th minutes. Patricia tried to refuse, but Gregory surprisingly sided with Amanda, saying that if there were questions about official records, they needed to be addressed promptly. I showed up to this meeting with printed copies of the March 15th recording transcript. I'd stayed up until 3 in the morning, going through the entire audio file and typing out every word spoken. The transcript was 23 pages long, with timestamps for every exchange. Sarah came with me this time. Her shift had been moved and she wanted to be there for support. She was wearing her scrubs because she had to go to work right after the meeting, but she sat next to me in the clubhouse with her arms crossed, looking like she was ready to fight someone. Patricia started the meeting by asking what this was about. Amanda said she had concerns about the accuracy of the March 15th meeting minutes and wanted to discuss them with the full board. Patricia's expression tightened. She said the minutes had been properly prepared by Linda as the board secretary and had been approved according to standard procedures. There was nothing to discuss. Amanda pulled out her copy of the minutes and said that according to this document, she had voted yes to my eviction. She stated clearly that she had actually voted no, and that the official record was incorrect. Linda looked up sharply. She said she had prepared the minutes based on notes provided to her by Patricia because she had been feeling ill during the second half of the meeting and had not captured everything accurately. Patricia had offered to fill in the gaps, and Linda had trusted her notes. Patricia tried to interrupt, but Amanda kept going. She said the minutes also failed to mention her request for a 2-week postponement to gather more evidence. The document made it sound like the board had rushed to judgment with complete unanimity when that was not what happened. Gregory frowned, looking at his copy of the minutes. He said he remembered some discussion about investigation timelines, though he had ultimately voted yes to eviction. Patricia stood up, her voice sharp. She said that Amanda was a new board member who clearly did not understand how HOA governance worked. The minutes were a summary of meetings, not a word-for-word transcript. Some details were simplified for clarity and brevity. I could not stay quiet anymore. I stood up and said that summarizing was one thing, but completely fabricating votes and omitting significant discussions was another. I said the minutes claimed the vote was 5-0 when it had actually been 3-2. Patricia told me I was not allowed to speak unless recognized by the chair. I told her I had every right to speak since this meeting was about my eviction, and I had evidence that the official record had been deliberately falsified. That got everyone's attention. I pulled out the transcript and started reading from it, providing exact quotes with timestamps. I read Amanda's request for more time. I read Linda's expression of concern. I read the actual vote count. Patricia tried to shut me down, saying that unauthorized recordings violated Arizona privacy laws and could not be used as evidence. She was wrong. Arizona is a one-party consent state, meaning as long as one person in a conversation knows about the recording, it is legal. I was that one person. I told her the recording was completely legal and that I had a full audio file to back up the transcript. I offered to play it right there for everyone to hear. The room went silent. Robert looked confused, asking if we should maybe just correct the minutes if there were errors. Gregory looked uncomfortable, glancing between Patricia and Amanda like he was trying to figure out which side to take. Patricia refused to listen to the recording. She said this entire meeting was improper and that Amanda had overstepped her authority by calling it. She moved to adjourn. Amanda said she was not done. She looked at Linda and asked directly whether Patricia had provided notes that changed the substance of what actually happened at the March 15th meeting. Linda looked miserable. She was a quiet woman who clearly hated confrontation, but she finally nodded and said yes. She explained that she had been distracted during the voting portion of the meeting because she was not feeling well, and Patricia had told her the vote was unanimous. Linda had trusted her and written the minutes accordingly. I asked Linda if Patricia had also provided the details about the commercial plumbing van and the 6 noise complaints. Linda hesitated, then admitted that those specifics had come from Patricia's notes as well. Patricia slammed her hand on the table. She said she had been working tirelessly to maintain community standards while people like me undermined her authority at every turn. She claimed I had been a problem from day one, refusing to respect the board and stirring up trouble among other homeowners. Sarah finally spoke up. She said Patricia's personal vendetta against her husband was obvious to anyone paying attention, and that forging meeting minutes to justify an illegal eviction was not just unethical, it was potentially criminal. Patricia's face went pale, then flushed bright red. She told Sarah to watch her accusations very carefully, that slander had legal consequences. Sarah, bless her heart, did not back down. She worked in a hospital where documentation and accurate records meant the difference between life and death. She understood the importance of honesty in official documents. She told Patricia that calling out documented fraud was not slander, it was telling the truth. Gregory cleared his throat and suggested that maybe the board should listen to the recording before things got more heated. He said if there was a discrepancy between the minutes and what actually happened, they had an obligation to correct it. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the portable speaker I had brought for exactly this purpose. I played the relevant portions of the March 15th meeting, starting with Patricia's recommendation for eviction and ending with the 3-2 vote. Hearing it played back in Patricia's own voice was devastating to her position. There was no way to spin it or reinterpret it. The recording was clear and unambiguous. She had lied about the vote count and had Linda create fraudulent minutes. When the recording finished, nobody spoke for a long moment. Then, Robert asked what they were supposed to do now. Amanda said the first step was to correct the official minutes to reflect what actually happened. The second step was to revoke the eviction notice since it was based on falsified records. The third step was to determine whether Patricia's actions warranted removal from the board. Patricia exploded. She said she had dedicated 5 years to serving this community, dealing with difficult homeowners and making unpopular decisions to protect property values. She claimed I had disrespected her from the beginning, undermining her authority and turning other homeowners against her. She said she might have made some mistakes in the heat of the moment, but her intentions were always to serve the community. Gregory said intentions did not matter if the actions were fraudulent. He looked deeply uncomfortable, but said he thought Patricia needed to step down as president while the board investigated what had happened. Patricia refused. She said only a vote of the full membership could remove her from the board, and she had no intention of resigning. Amanda pointed out that the HOA bylaws allowed the board to suspend a member pending investigation if that member was accused of misconduct related to their official duties. She moved to temporarily suspend Patricia from all board activities until they could determine the full scope of what had happened. Linda seconded the motion immediately. Gregory and Robert voted yes. Patricia, shouting about coups and conspiracies, obviously voted no. The motion passed 4-1. Patricia was suspended. She stormed out of the clubhouse screaming that we had not heard the last of this and that she would sue every single one of us for defamation. After she left, the remaining board members looked shell-shocked. Amanda took charge, saying they needed to formally retract the eviction notice and issue a public correction about the March 15th minutes. She also said they should probably consult with the HOA's attorney about the legal implications of what had happened. I asked what happened now with Patricia. Could she just come back to the board once things cooled down? Gregory said they would need to hold a special election and let the full community vote on whether Patricia should be removed permanently. In the meantime, the suspension kept her from participating in board activities or accessing HOA records. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved quickly. The board consulted with their attorney, who was horrified when he heard about the forged minutes. He explained that HOA boards had significant legal obligations when it came to record keeping, and that deliberately falsifying official documents could expose the board to liability and potentially criminal charges. The attorney advised the board to send a formal letter to all community members explaining what had happened and announcing the special election to determine Patricia's future. He also suggested I might have grounds for a civil lawsuit against Patricia personally for the stress and potential damages caused by the fraudulent eviction attempt. I was not particularly interested in suing Patricia. I just wanted her away from any position of power where she could hurt people. But Sarah convinced me that we should at least consult with our own attorney to understand our options. We hired a lawyer named Marcus Pemberton who specialized in HOA disputes and real estate law. He reviewed all my documentation, listened to the recording, and told us we had one of the strongest cases he had ever seen. He said we could sue Patricia for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and abuse of process. We could also potentially sue the HOA itself for failing to properly supervise its board members, though he thought that would be harder to win since the other board members had acted properly once they learned about the fraud. Marcus said the recording was the key to everything. Without it, the case would have devolved into, she said, arguments about what happened during the meeting. With it, we had irrefutable proof that Patricia had deliberately lied and manipulated official records. He also warned us that things might get uglier before they got better. Patricia struck him as the type of person who would fight back rather than accept responsibility. He advised us to document everything going forward and to keep multiple copies of all evidence in secure locations. Marcus was right about things getting uglier. 3 days after Patricia was suspended, I received a certified letter from an attorney representing her. The letter accused me of illegally recording a private meeting without consent, using that recording to defame Patricia and damage her reputation, and conspiring with other board members to stage a coup against lawfully elected leadership. The letter demanded I destroy all copies of the recording, issue a public apology, and pay Patricia $20,000 in damages. If I failed to comply within 10 days, she would file a lawsuit. I forwarded the letter to Marcus, who actually laughed when he read it. He said it was the intimidation tactic with no legal merit whatsoever. The recording was completely legal. Truth was an absolute defense against defamation, and there was no such thing as a coup against an HOA board member who had committed fraud. Marcus sent a response letter explaining Arizona's one-party consent law, noting that Patricia's own voice on the recording proved the accuracy of my claims, and informing her attorney that we were considering filing our own lawsuit if the harassment continued. Patricia's attorney backed down after that, but Patricia herself did not. She started a whisper campaign throughout the neighborhood, telling anyone who would listen that I was a troublemaker who had manipulated the board with fake evidence. She claimed I had edited the recording to make her look bad, and that the other board members were too inexperienced to see through my deception. Some people believed her. There is always a segment of any community that trusts established authority figures and resists change. But most homeowners, once they heard the full story and listened to portions of the unedited recording, sided with me. The special election was scheduled for late April, and Patricia's support was crumbling. Then, Patricia made her biggest mistake. She tried to access HOA financial records while suspended. Robert, who was serving as interim treasurer, discovered that someone had logged into the HOA's online banking system using Patricia's credentials. The login happened at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday night, and the person had attempted to transfer $15,000 from the reserve account to an account at a different bank. The transfer was automatically flagged for review because it exceeded the single transaction limit set by the board. Robert received an email alert and immediately froze the account. He reported the incident to the police. When detectives investigated, they found that the receiving account belonged to Patricia. She claimed she was simply moving money to a high-yield savings account to earn better interest for the HOA, but she could not explain why she had done it in the middle of the night while suspended from the board, or why she had not informed any other board members about the transfer. The detectives dug deeper and discovered that Patricia had made several other questionable financial transactions over the past 2 years, small amounts, usually between $1,000 and $3,000, transferred from the HOA account to various personal accounts or credit cards. The transactions had been coded as reimbursements for HOA expenses, but when investigators requested receipts and documentation, Patricia could not provide them. In total, the detectives estimated Patricia had embezzled approximately $38,000 from the HOA over a 26-month period. The case went from a civil HOA dispute to criminal fraud charges. Patricia was arrested in early May and charged with multiple counts of theft, fraud, and embezzlement. Her bail was set at $50,000, which she posted immediately. The community was in shock. Some people still defended Patricia, claiming the charges were politically motivated or that there must be some misunderstanding. But most homeowners were outraged that someone they had trusted with their fees and assessments had been stealing from them for years. The special election became unnecessary. Patricia resigned from the board immediately after her arrest, citing health reasons and the need to focus on her legal defense. The board appointed a new president, a retired engineer named Donald Harper, who had no connection to Patricia and had a reputation for being fair and detail-oriented. Donald's first action was to hire a forensic accountant to review all HOA financial records going back 5 years. The accountant found even more irregularities than the police had discovered. The final total came to $47,000 that Patricia had stolen or misappropriated. The HOA filed a civil lawsuit against Patricia to recover the stolen funds. Patricia's criminal defense attorney was negotiating a plea deal with the prosecutor's office that would involve restitution, probation, and possibly some jail time depending on her cooperation and willingness to pay back the money. As for the falsified meeting minutes that had started this whole mess, the board formally corrected the record and issued a public apology to me. They acknowledged that I had been targeted unfairly and that the eviction attempt had been based on fraudulent documentation. They offered to reimburse me for any legal fees I had incurred defending myself. Sarah and I discussed whether to pursue our own lawsuit against Patricia. Marcus said we had an excellent case and could likely win substantial damages for emotional distress and the cost of defending against the eviction. But honestly, we were exhausted. Patricia was facing criminal charges and financial ruin. We had been vindicated in the eyes of the community. Pursuing additional legal action felt like overkill. We decided to let the criminal justice system handle Patricia and focus on moving forward with our lives. The trial took place in September. Patricia pleaded guilty to 5 counts of theft and 2 counts of fraud in exchange for the prosecutor dropping the embezzlement charges. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison, suspended all but 6 months, and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA plus fines and court costs. She would serve 6 months in county jail, followed by 5 years of probation. I attended the sentencing hearing. Patricia looked smaller somehow, diminished. Her attorney read a statement on her behalf apologizing to the community and claiming she had been under tremendous stress dealing with family issues and had made terrible decisions. She asked for leniency and promised to make things right. The judge was not particularly sympathetic. He said Patricia had held a position of trust and had violated that trust repeatedly over an extended period. He noted that her attempts to evict me using forged documents showed a pattern of dishonesty that went beyond financial crimes. He said the community deserved better leadership and that Patricia needed to be held accountable for her actions. When the judge announced the sentence, Patricia started crying. Her family members in the courtroom looked devastated. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I had not wanted to destroy Patricia's life. I just wanted to protect my home and hold her accountable for trying to illegally evict me. After the hearing, several reporters approached me outside the courthouse. The case had gotten some local media attention because HOA fraud stories always generated public interest. I gave a brief statement saying I was glad justice had been served and that I hoped this case would encourage other HOA boards to maintain proper oversight and transparency. One reporter asked if I thought the punishment fit the crime. I said that Patricia had not just stolen money, she had abused her power and tried to force an innocent family out of their home using fraudulent documents. The 6 months in jail seemed appropriate given the severity and duration of her misconduct. Back in Sycamore Springs, the community slowly returned to normal. Donald Harper proved to be an excellent HOA president, focused on transparency and following proper procedures. He instituted new financial controls requiring 2 board members to approve any transaction over $500. He also implemented a policy requiring all board meetings to be audio recorded with copies available to any homeowner who requested them. The board held a special assessment to cover the shortfall from Patricia's theft while they waited for restitution payments. Most homeowners understood the situation and paid without complaint. A few people grumbled, but there was not much choice. The money had to come from somewhere. Sarah and I settled back into our routine. The stress of the previous months had taken a toll on both of us, but we came through it stronger. Sarah joked that surviving an HOA war was good practice for whatever other challenges life threw at us. I became more involved in the community after everything that happened. I joined the finance committee and helped review budgets and expenditures. I wanted to make sure nothing like Patricia's fraud could happen again. Several other homeowners who had been suspicious of Patricia but afraid to speak up also became more active in HOA governance. The recording I made that night in March became something of a legend in the community. People referred to it as the smoking gun that brought down a corrupt board president. I kept the original file backed up in 3 different locations, though I hoped I would never need it again. Marcus Pemberton told me the case would probably end up in law school textbooks as an example of why documentation matters and why HOA boards need proper oversight. He said the combination of the forged minutes, the illegal eviction attempt, and the financial fraud made it a perfect storm of HOA misconduct. Looking back, I realized how close I came to losing everything. If I had not trusted my instincts and recorded that meeting, Patricia's falsified minutes would have stood as the official record. I would have been evicted from my home based on lies, and Patricia would have continued stealing from the community unchecked. The whole experience taught me several important lessons. First, always document everything when dealing with organizations that have power over your life. Second, trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Third, stand up for yourself even when authority figures try to intimidate you. By December, Patricia had been released from jail after serving her 6 months. She moved out of Sycamore Springs shortly after, relocating to somewhere in California according to the rumor mill. The house she had owned in the community was sold to cover part of the restitution she owed. I heard she was working as a retail manager and making monthly payments to the HOA as part of her probation agreement. I did not feel any particular satisfaction knowing she was struggling. I'd never wanted revenge, just fairness and accountability. The system had worked, albeit slowly and imperfectly. The new HOA board under Donald's leadership was night and day different from Patricia's regime. Meetings were productive and transparent, financial reports were detailed and clear, violation notices were issued only when actual violations occurred, with proper documentation and opportunities to respond. The community felt more like a neighborhood and less like a police state. Sarah and I hosted a barbecue that summer, inviting several neighbors, including Amanda Foster, who had become a good friend through the whole ordeal. Amanda had been instrumental in standing up to Patricia and pushing for accountability. Without her support on the board, things might have turned out very differently. Over burgers and beer, Amanda told us she had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of speaking up when something seemed wrong. She said she had almost stayed quiet during that March meeting, not wanting to rock the boat as a new board member. But something about Patricia's rush to judgment had bothered her enough to voice concerns. I raised my glass and toasted Amanda for having the courage to ask questions and demand evidence. I told her she had probably saved my family from being illegally evicted and had helped uncover fraud that might have continued for years. The conversation turned to lighter topics after that. We talked about work and vacation plans and the terrible heat that Arizona summers brought. Normal things that normal neighbors discuss without the weight of criminal charges and court battles hanging over everything. As the sun set and the desert air finally started to cool, I looked around at the people gathered in my backyard. These were my neighbors, my community. We had been through something difficult together and had come out stronger on the other side. I thought about the eviction notice that had been taped to my door 8 months earlier, and the moment I realized I had audio proof that would destroy Patricia's lies. That recording had been my insurance policy, my truth in the face of manufactured fiction. Sarah came up beside me, slipping her hand into mine. She asked what I was thinking about. I told her I was thinking about how lucky we were, lucky that I had recorded the meeting, lucky that Amanda had the integrity to challenge false minutes, lucky that the truth had won out over corruption. Sarah squeezed my hand and said it was not just luck. I had fought for our home and our rights. I had refused to be bullied or intimidated. That was not luck. That was courage and persistence. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was both luck and determination that got us through. Either way, we were still here, in our home, with our community intact. As the party wound down and guests started heading home, I stood on my front porch looking out at the neighborhood. The streetlights were coming on, casting warm pools of light along the sidewalk. Somewhere a dog was barking. A car drove past slowly, the driver waving at me through the open window. It looked like a normal, peaceful suburban community. And finally, after months of chaos and conflict, it felt that way too. The HOA drama was over. Patricia was gone. Justice had been served. And I still had the recording, preserved forever on my phone and multiple backup drives, a reminder that truth and evidence matter more than position and power. I never wanted to live through something like that again. But if I did, at least now I knew exactly what to do. Hit record. The months that followed brought a strange sense of normalcy that I had not experienced since before the HOA troubles began. Sarah and I fell back into comfortable routines. She continued her demanding schedule at the hospital, and I kept working remotely while occasionally driving into Phoenix for in-person meetings at the tech company. Donald Harper's leadership of the HOA board transformed the organization's culture. He instituted regular community meetings where homeowners could voice concerns without fear of retaliation. He created committees for landscaping, social events, and architectural review, distributing responsibility among volunteers rather than concentrating power in a small group. The finance committee I joined met monthly to review expenditures and budget projections. We implemented zero-based budgeting, requiring justification for every line item rather than just rolling over previous year amounts. We also created a long-term capital plan for major community improvements, replacing the haphazard approach Patricia had used to justify her failed fee increase proposal. During one finance committee meeting in January, Robert Wallace pulled me aside. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot while trying to figure out how to start the conversation. Finally, he told me he wanted to apologize. He said he had voted for my eviction without asking enough questions or demanding evidence. He had trusted Patricia because she was the president and seemed confident in her accusations. He felt terrible about his role in what had happened and wanted me to know he had learned from the experience. I appreciated Robert's apology. I told him that Patricia had manipulated all of them, using her authority and forceful personality to push through decisions without proper scrutiny. The important thing was that he recognized the mistake and was working to make sure it did not happen again. Robert said he had been thinking a lot about leadership and responsibility since Patricia's arrest. He realized that being on an HOA board was not just about attending meetings and voting. It required active engagement, asking hard questions, and demanding accountability. He promised he would never again vote on something as serious as eviction without thoroughly reviewing the evidence first. We shook hands, and I could see the relief on Robert's face. He had been carrying guilt for months, and acknowledging it openly seemed to lift some of that burden. The forensic accountant hired by the board finished the comprehensive financial review in February. The final report was damning. Patricia had not only stolen money directly through fraudulent reimbursements, she had also manipulated vendor contracts to receive kickbacks. The landscaping company the HOA used had been paying her 15% of their monthly invoice in cash. The pool maintenance company had been giving her gift cards worth hundreds of dollars in exchange for retaining their contract, despite higher bids from competitors. The total amount of financial misconduct exceeded $60,000 when all the kickbacks and hidden payments were included. The board forwarded the additional findings to the prosecutor's office, but Patricia had already been sentenced. The prosecutor said they could potentially bring new charges, but it might be more effective to focus on restitution through civil litigation. The HOA's insurance company got involved at that point. The community had directors' and officers' liability insurance that covered board member misconduct. The insurance company paid the HOA $40,000 to cover part of the losses, then pursued their own lawsuit against Patricia to recover the payout. Patricia's probation officer was copied on all the civil filings, which meant any settlement or judgment would factor into her restitution obligations. I stayed as far away from that legal mess as possible. It was not my fight anymore. The community had competent attorneys and insurance adjusters handling recovery efforts. My focus was on moving forward and helping ensure the new board maintained high standards of accountability. In March, exactly 1 year after the infamous recorded meeting, the board held a community appreciation event at the clubhouse. Donald gave a short speech thanking homeowners for their patience during the difficult transition period. He announced that the HOA had recovered about $47,000 through restitution payments and insurance settlements, with more expected as civil litigation continued. Donald also announced new bylaw amendments that would be voted on at the annual meeting in May. The amendments included term limits for board members, mandatory background checks for anyone seeking board positions, and enhanced financial controls, including quarterly audits by an independent accountant. Several homeowners approached me during the event to thank me for standing up to Patricia. An older woman named Margaret Coleman told me that Patricia had bullied her with violation notices for years, and she had been too afraid to fight back. She said watching me challenge the board had given her hope that things could change. A younger couple who had moved into the community the previous summer told me they had almost backed out of their home purchase when they heard about the HOA drama. But seeing how the community came together to remove a corrupt board member and implement better oversight made them feel confident about their investment. These conversations reminded me why the whole ordeal had been worth the stress and legal fees. Communities function best when people stand up against abuse of power and demand accountability. If I had just accepted the fraudulent eviction, Patricia would have continued her misconduct indefinitely. Sarah and I voted yes on all the proposed bylaw amendments at the May annual meeting. They passed overwhelmingly, with over 80% of homeowners supporting the changes. The meeting also included board elections. Donald ran for another term as president and won easily. Amanda Foster was re-elected as vice president. Linda Chen chose not to seek re-election, saying she wanted to focus on her family. 2 new board members were elected, both of whom had been active in community committees and had strong reputations for integrity. The meeting ended with a moment I had not expected. Donald asked me to come to the front of the room. I was confused, but walked up to where the board sat. Donald pulled out a framed certificate and read from it. The certificate recognized me for outstanding service to the Sycamore Springs community. It cited my courage in documenting and exposing board misconduct, my dedication to transparent governance through service on the Finance Committee, and my commitment to protecting homeowner rights. The room erupted in applause. I stood there holding the certificate, feeling genuinely touched. When I moved to Sycamore Springs 3 years earlier, I just wanted a nice place to live with good schools and reasonable commute times. I never imagined I would end up at the center of an HOA corruption scandal and legal battle. Sarah was beaming from her seat in the 3rd row. She later told me she had known about the certificate ahead of time and had been bursting to tell me, but wanted it to be a surprise. Life continued to improve as spring turned to summer. The community pool opened on schedule with newly updated equipment, paid for through the reserve fund that Patricia had tried to steal from. The landscaping throughout Sycamore Springs looked better than ever because the board had renegotiated the vendor contract without Patricia's kickback scheme inflating costs. I even started to enjoy HOA meetings, which I never thought I would say. The new board operated with professionalism and respect for homeowners. Discussions were substantive. Decisions were made based on evidence and community input rather than personal vendettas. In July, I received a call from Marcus Pemberton, my attorney. He said Patricia's criminal defense attorney had contacted him with a surprising request. Patricia wanted to meet with me. I asked what she could possibly want to discuss. Marcus said she had not provided details, only that she hoped I would agree to a meeting as part of her effort to make amends. Her attorney emphasized that this was not related to any legal matters, and that Patricia understood she had no leverage or grounds to make demands. My first instinct was to refuse. What could Patricia possibly say that would matter at this point? She had tried to destroy my life with lies and forged documents. She had stolen from the community and abused her position of trust. I owed her nothing. But Marcus suggested I at least hear her out. He said closure sometimes came from unexpected places, and that Patricia might have information or insights that would help me understand what had happened. He offered to attend the meeting with me if that would make me more comfortable. I talked it over with Sarah. She was skeptical, warning that Patricia might try to manipulate me or play on my sympathy. But she also trusted me to handle the situation and said she would support whatever I decided. I eventually agreed to meet with Patricia, with Marcus present. We arranged to meet at Marcus's law office in Scottsdale, neutral territory where I would feel safe and have legal representation immediately available. The meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon in late July. I took the afternoon off work and drove to Marcus's office, feeling anxious and unsure what to expect. Patricia arrived 10 minutes early, accompanied by her attorney. She looked different than I remembered, thinner, with gray roots showing in her blonde hair. She was wearing plain clothes instead of the designer outfits she had always favored at board meetings. She looked tired and defeated. We sat in Marcus's conference room across a large table. Patricia's attorney, a middle-aged man named Raymond Foster, began by thanking Marcus and me for agreeing to the meeting. He emphasized that nothing discussed would affect Patricia's criminal case or civil restitution obligations, which had already been settled. Patricia cleared her throat and began to speak. Her voice was soft, lacking the commanding tone I remembered from board meetings. She said she wanted to apologize. Not the generic apology her attorney had read at sentencing, but a direct personal acknowledgement of what she had done to me specifically. Patricia said she had been wrong to target me after I questioned her budget proposal. She admitted that her ego had been hurt and that she had taken my legitimate questions as personal attacks. Instead of addressing my concerns transparently, she had decided to punish me through harassment and manufactured violations. She said the fake meeting minutes were the culmination of months of escalating misconduct. She had convinced herself that I was a threat to her authority and that removing me from the community was justified for the greater good. She had not considered that she was abusing her power or that her actions were criminal. She had rationalized everything as necessary to maintain order and protect property values. Patricia paused, looking down at her hands. Then she continued, addressing the embezzlement. She said the financial theft had started small. She had approved a reimbursement to herself for expenses that did not actually exist, justifying it as compensation for all the unpaid hours she spent on HOA business. When no one questioned it, she did it again, and again. Over time, the amounts grew and the frequency increased. She told herself she deserved the money for her dedication and hard work. The kickback arrangements with vendors had evolved similarly. A landscaping company owner had offered her a gift basket during the holidays one year. The next year, it was a gift card. Eventually, it became regular cash payments. She convinced herself these were thank you gifts rather than bribes, even though she knew that was not true. Patricia said she'd been living beyond her means for years, trying to maintain an image of success that her actual income could not support. Her husband had lost his job in the economic downturn back in the early 2010s, and they had never fully recovered financially. She had been too proud to admit they were struggling, so she stole from the HOA to fill the gap. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. She said she knew none of this excused what she had done. She had hurt me and my family. She had betrayed the trust of the entire community. She had earned every day of jail time and every dollar of restitution she was required to pay. Patricia said she was not asking for forgiveness. She did not expect or deserve it. She just wanted me to know that she understood the magnitude of her actions and that she was deeply sorry. The room was silent for a moment after she finished. I did not know what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her exactly how much stress and fear she had caused. Part of me felt an unexpected sympathy for someone whose life had collapsed under the weight of her own bad decisions. Finally, I spoke. I told Patricia that her apology did not change what had happened, but I appreciated her taking responsibility instead of making excuses. I said I hoped she learned from the experience and found a way to rebuild her life with integrity. I also told her that the recording I made that night had probably saved both of us. It saved me from illegal eviction, obviously, but it also saved her from potentially worse consequences. If the forged minutes had stood and I had been evicted, I would have sued the HOA and the board members individually. The case would have dragged on for years, costing everyone far more in legal fees and damages. The recording forced accountability quickly, which allowed the community to move forward. Patricia nodded slowly. She said she had not thought about it that way, but I was probably right. Her attorney said they needed to leave for another appointment. Patricia stood, thanked me again for meeting with her, and walked out of the conference room. After they left, Marcus asked how I felt. I told him the meeting had been strange but worthwhile. Seeing Patricia broken and contrite did not undo the harm she had caused, but it provided a sense of closure that a court verdict could not. Marcus said he was proud of how I had handled the situation. He noted that many people would have used the meeting as an opportunity to attack or humiliate someone who had wronged them. Taking the high road showed character. I drove home that evening thinking about accountability and redemption. Patricia was paying the price for her actions through jail time, probation, and restitution. She had lost her position, her reputation, and probably most of her friends. Her life would never be the same. But she was still a human being who had made terrible choices driven by ego, financial pressure, and gradual moral compromise. I could acknowledge her humanity while still holding her accountable for what she had done. When I got home, Sarah asked how the meeting went. I told her everything Patricia had said. Sarah listened quietly, then said she was glad Patricia had apologized, but that actions mattered more than words. Patricia would spend years making restitution payments and living with the consequences of her crimes. That was appropriate and necessary. I agreed. The apology was nice, but justice required more than words. The rest of that summer was peaceful. The HOA continued to function smoothly under competent leadership. No more fake violations appeared on my door. No more emergency meetings to discuss manufactured crises. It was boring in the best possible way. In September, I was invited to speak at a local homeowners' rights group meeting. The organization had heard about the Sycamore Springs case and wanted me to share lessons learned with other homeowners facing HOA disputes. I prepared a presentation focusing on 3 key points. First, document everything in writing and keep copies of all correspondence with your HOA. Second, know your rights under state law and your HOA's governing documents. Third, trust your instincts when something seems wrong and do not be afraid to ask questions or challenge authority. I also talked about the importance of the recording I had made. I explained Arizona's one-party consent law and encouraged anyone attending contentious HOA meetings to record them for their own protection. I showed portions of the March meeting recording, demonstrating how clear audio evidence could refute false claims. The audience was engaged and asked thoughtful questions. Several people shared their own HOA horror stories involving aggressive board members, selective enforcement of rules, and financial mismanagement. A few asked for recommendations for attorneys specializing in HOA law. I gave them Marcus's contact information, knowing he would be happy to help. After the presentation, a woman in her 30s approached me. She introduced herself as Jennifer Sullivan and said she lived in a community in Mesa where the HOA board was trying to foreclose on her home over disputed fines. She had been fighting them for 18 months and was running out of money for legal fees. I asked what the dispute was about. Jennifer explained that she had installed solar panels on her roof with proper permits from the city, but the HOA claimed the panels violated architectural guidelines because they were visible from the street. She had submitted the design for approval before installation and had never received a response. After the panels were up, the HOA claimed her application had been rejected and demanded she remove them. When she refused, they started fining her $500 per day. The fines had accumulated to over $200,000. The HOA had filed foreclosure proceedings to collect the debt. Jennifer had hired an attorney who argued the fines were excessive and that the HOA had never properly denied her application, but the legal battle was draining her savings. I felt angry hearing her story. This was exactly the kind of HOA overreach that gave homeowners associations a bad reputation. I asked if she had documentation of her application and the lack of response from the board. She said yes, she had everything documented. She also had emails from board members contradicting each other about whether applications were approved by silence or required explicit written approval. I told Jennifer to make sure her attorney emphasized the contradictory policies and the HOA's failure to follow their own procedures. I also suggested she contact local news outlets. Media attention often pressured HOAs to settle disputes rather than face public scrutiny. Jennifer thanked me and said she would follow up on those suggestions. We exchanged contact information, and I told her to let me know how things progressed. Over the following months, I occasionally heard from people I had met at the homeowners' rights meeting or who had read news articles about the Sycamore Springs case. Most were looking for advice or encouragement as they dealt with their own HOA conflicts. I helped where I could, sharing strategies that had worked for me and connecting people with resources. The experience made me realize that HOA disputes were incredibly common and that many homeowners felt powerless against boards that abused their authority. I started thinking about ways to create better accountability mechanisms and transparency requirements for HOAs. In December, I proposed to the Sycamore Springs Board that we create a Homeowner Bill of Rights, a document outlining the rights and protections every community member could expect. The board liked the idea and formed a committee to draft the language. The Homeowner Bill of Rights we developed included provisions like the right to attend board meetings, the right to access financial records, the right to due process before fines or violations are imposed, and the right to challenge board decisions through a formal appeal process. We also included a whistleblower protection clause stating that homeowners who reported board misconduct in good faith would not face retaliation. The board approved the Homeowner Bill of Rights in February and sent copies to every household in Sycamore Springs. Several other HOAs in the area reached out asking for copies of the document to adapt for their own communities. It felt good to create something positive out of the negative experience I had been through. If my battle with Patricia could help prevent other homeowners from facing similar abuse, then the stress and legal fees had been worth it. As the second anniversary of the recorded meeting approached in March, I reflected on how much had changed. Patricia was presumably somewhere in California working and making restitution payments. The Sycamore Springs HOA was financially stable and well managed. My family was secure in our home with no fear of fraudulent eviction. The recording still existed on my phone and backup drives, a digital time capsule of corruption exposed and justice served. I had not listened to it in months and had no plans to listen to it again. Its value was in existing, in being available as proof if anyone ever questioned what had really happened that night. Sarah and I celebrated our 7th wedding anniversary that April with a weekend trip to San Diego. As we walked along the beach, she brought up the HOA saga without prompting. She said she was proud of how I had handled everything. I could have backed down when Patricia tried to intimidate me with fake violations. I could have accepted the fraudulent eviction and moved rather than fight. Instead, I had stood up for what was right and held a corrupt official accountable. I told Sarah that I had just done what anyone should do when faced with injustice, but she insisted that many people would have taken the path of least resistance, avoiding conflict even at great personal cost. Maybe she was right. Maybe standing up to authority figures and demanding accountability did require a certain kind of courage. Or maybe I had just been stubborn and unwilling to let Patricia win. Either way, the outcome had been positive. Patricia was held accountable, the community recovered stolen funds, and new safeguards were implemented to prevent future misconduct. As we watched the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, I thought about the eviction notice that had appeared on my door 2 years earlier. At the time, it had felt like a catastrophe, a threat to everything Sarah and I had built together. Now it seemed like the beginning of something important, a catalyst that exposed corruption and led to meaningful reform. The recording I had made on a hunch, just because something felt wrong, had changed everything. Without it, Patricia's lies would have become the official record. Without it, I would have lost my home, and Patricia would have continued stealing and abusing her power. Technology had given me the tools to document the truth. Arizona law had given me the right to use that documentation, and my willingness to stand up and fight had made the difference between justice and corruption. Those lessons would stay with me forever. Document everything, know your rights, stand up for what is right even when it is difficult or scary. We flew back to Phoenix on Sunday evening, returning to our home in Sycamore Springs. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed fresh paint on the clubhouse and new plants in the common area landscaping. The community looked good, well-maintained and peaceful. I walked into our house, grateful to be home and grateful for the journey that had brought us to this moment. The HOA drama was truly over now, relegated to history and hard-learned lessons, but the recording remained, archived and preserved, a reminder that truth matters and that ordinary people can stand up to power when armed with evidence and determination. That night, I backed up all my files one more time, including the recording. Then I went to bed, content in the knowledge that my home was secure, my community was in good hands, and justice had been served. The Sycamore Springs chapter of my life had tested me in ways I never expected, but I had emerged stronger and wiser. And if I ever faced another situation where authority figures tried to abuse their power, I would know exactly what to do. Hit record, stand firm, and let the truth speak for itself.